Hi, this is Dr. Lou Pulsfer, and I'm going to talk this time about the Deus Ex rules of role-playing. Now, you may be familiar with Deus Ex. It's one of the most famous video games created quite a few years ago under Warren Spector's lead. And he wrote a set of rules for his people to follow while they were making the game. And he recently talked about this in an article on the web. So here are his rules and some additions made by other people. The first rule, always show the goal. In other words, players need to know what it is they're supposed to do. Now this is the modern way to play. It's a bit of hand-holding that you might not have seen 15 or 20 years ago. But nowadays in video games, it's very common to hold the hands of the players and essentially tell them what they need to do next. I think that a lot of times when it's not clear what to do next is when players can be inventive, but perhaps that's easier on the players when there are several players, as in a role-playing game adventure, rather than a single player as in your typical video game level. So you'll have to decide how to treat this particular guideline or rule. The next one is problems, not puzzles. It's an obstacle course, not a jigsaw puzzle. And that ties in with the next one, which is multiple solutions. In other words, don't set up situations where there's only one way to succeed. That's a puzzle. It has a solution. Set up situations that are problems, and then the players can find inventive ways to succeed. They'll enjoy it more. You'll enjoy it more if you watch people playtest the game. It's a win-win situation. There are people who like puzzles, but perhaps not in levels or adventures. The next rule is no forced failure. For example, don't have a player suddenly die in a situation where he couldn't possibly have foreseen that he might die. He couldn't possibly know about it. Like the undetectable trap that he steps on and lasers slice through him and kill him. Nobody likes that. The only person who could possibly like that is a person who devised the situation and is being sadistic. And that's not what we want from level and adventure designers. We want player-centric level and adventure designers who do things so the players can enjoy themselves. His next rule is, it's the characters, stupid. The game is about the characters. If there are in fact characters in the level or adventure, which often there are, the choice of interaction style should always be the players, not the designers. If players want to try to use stealth, okay. If players want to kill everybody in sight, well, that's probably not going to be very smart, and that has to be taken into account by the designer, but the designer shouldn't prevent it. My brother told me once about a character in a well-known Elder Scrolls game that had to stay alive for various purposes, so it didn't matter how many times you killed him, he kept coming back. Something like that, where the designers had said, well, we can't have this happen, so we won't let the players do that. I don't think that's a good idea. Maybe sometimes you can't avoid it, but it's not a good idea. Let the characters interact in the way they want, but if they do something stupid like kill somebody who they shouldn't kill, then perhaps they should pay for it. The next rule, players do, NPCs watch. Now, in 1976, I played a Dungeons & Dragons adventure where the referee included in our party one of his characters, a Darini. Well, Darini were characters from a popular book series of the time, and they were awfully powerful. So we were in a dungeon and we were fighting demons. And we were single-digit level characters. We weren't double-digit level characters, so it was pretty scary. And we found a door where we knew, by detection spells and so on, that there were about 8 demons inside. Well, this was very, very formidable, and while we were wondering what to do, the referee's character walked through the door using his psionic powers, There was a big struggle, and he came out having killed all 8 of the demons. Do you think that was fun for us? Do you think that was interesting for us? No. We stood and watched while he did the work. The NPC did the work. This is a bad idea. Bad idea. The next rule, games get harder, players get smarter. The idea of increasing challenge as you go along because the players have learned how to cope with things, so that something that would have completely thwarted them to start with, they can now take in stride. Pat your player on the back. Reward players regularly and frequently but unpredictably. Now, the more modern way is predictable. Players have come to expect that every monster they kill will have a loot drop, even if it makes no sense that that monster had any loot at all. You have to decide whether you want to accommodate the modern way or whether you want to do things a little bit more the old-fashioned way, the way that Warren Spector talked about for Deus Ex. Think 3D. If you've played many levels or adventures, you've probably run into a situation where you walk into a room and you forget to look up, and there happens to be some kind of vestibule above the door with a bunch of monsters, and as your party walks in, they all jump down amongst you, and it's pretty bad. So that's thinking 3D, making sure there's a third dimension up and down as well as left, right, center. Think interconnected, avoid linearity. I interpret this to mean don't force people along a particular path. You can have lots of different connections, and this kind of goes back to letting the players choose their own solution. If they wander around as though they were in a maze but end up coming to where they need to go instead of going straight there, that's okay. There can be more than one way to get there. And here are some of the add-ons from Harvey. All missions, locations, and problems will be specifically keyed to skills and skill levels, augmentations and augmentation levels, objects and weapons. Now, this is a more modern sort of idea. I like to set up situations and let people resourcefully use what they've got. But this rule is suggesting that when you have a particular situation set up, you should have in mind what skills, augmentations, and so on the players are going to use to overcome that situation. You can do things that way. It may work better, but it's definitely not the old school way. Another of these add-ons is gameplay will rely on a variety of tools rather than just one, and of course that's a really good idea. If, say in a fantasy game, a player is really good with a sword and all he ever does is bash people with his sword, that can get kind of tedious. Give situations where they have to use something other than bashing people with a sword. Combat will require more thought than what's the biggest gun in my inventory. And that's another aspect of this, getting people to think, getting people to figure out what is the best thing to do in a particular situation. Geometry should contribute to gameplay. In other words, how the dungeon is built, if it's a dungeon, or how the spaceship is arranged, if it's an abandoned spaceship, something like that. That should make a difference to the gameplay. The overall mood and tone will be clear and consistent, and that's generally a good idea. And I've talked about that separately. Keep in mind with these rules that Spector prefers to play single-player games, that is, games against the computer. He likes to design the same. He doesn't design for a lot of players. He doesn't design player versus player. He wants single player and computer, and that's the way he likes to do things. So these rules are written with that in mind. And consequently, they may not necessarily be as appropriate or applicable for a multiplayer game such as a tabletop RPG where everybody is on the same side against the bad guys, the enemy, run by the referee. And there's the URL of the article.